Hello and welcome to 10 Very Big Books, a Malazan Readthrough podcast. My name is Peter Bond, and today on the show, we've wrapped up our read-through of Reaper's Gale. So, as always, we have our mailbags through. So I've invited some special guests on the show so we can talk through Book 7 with spoilers and in regards to the whole series writ large. So we'll be talking about those 10 books in total, so if that's not something you want to hear, then see you later. So with me today, I've invited two illustrious Malazan YouTubers. First, we have QuickJen. How are you doing? How are you feeling today?
Hey, Peter. I'm doing pretty good.
Glad to have you on the show. And along with her, we have the illustrious Kal from a Terry Goodkind-esque YouTube channel. You may have seen him.
It's only,
How are you doing
it's
today,
only
buddy?
named after him. I hope it's not Terry Goodkind-esque, because that's a little insulting.
That's
a hell of a thing
meaning
for you to say to me, as you would say in Tombstone. But yeah, it's really good and kind. Getting close to, I haven't checked in a little bit. I think I'm getting close to 300 subscribers now, so woohoo.
Both of you guys have great channels, and the links will be in our episode description. But today, we're talking about Reaper's Gale, and I was just talking about this on the Mailbag show. And I have to say, this has never been one of my favorite books, and I felt particularly frustrated with it my first time through. The good news is, rather predictably, I think the second time I read through the book, I had a much better time. And I think largely because when I first read the book, I was very excited to get to dueling with Rulad, or really kind of returning to a lot of the storylines I really connected with in Midnight Tides. So I felt really frustrated the first time I came through the book, but I think knowing kind of the pace, or knowing that we weren't going to be kind of returning, so to speak, that we were going to start all these different stories, or kind of the scope of what this book was, I felt like I was definitely able to enjoy the book a lot more, and I had a much better time reading this book. However, I don't feel like it's one of my favorites or anything, and both of you have talked about this book as being one you think highly of, or a favorite of yours, so Jen, I'd be curious about how you think about this book and kind of what draws you to it. What makes you think this stands out, you know?
I have a very hard time choosing a favorite, but usually if I have to list them, this one is right at the top, if not the top spot for me.
Wow.
And I understand that frustration. I think I had some similar feelings the first time through, especially with that first half. But I also think that part of that is intentional, that frustration is reflecting the frustration of so many of the characters in the book itself. And that really, even the parts that are not pleasant to read, or that may not be fun to read, are extremely powerful. And to me, they all come together thematically really well. But I think, honestly, more than that, really, this is that moment that I think I've been waiting for 7 books, where suddenly all of these disparate storylines and all of these characters that we've gotten to know all over this world are finally starting to come together. It's the beginning of the end, and that's exciting.
Yeah. Kal, I want to hear what you think, but I do want to build on what you said right there, because for me, in book 6 was the first time you're like, oh, I get it. Maybe all these plot lines are going to come together. Like, this is what the books are about. And and I think that's what contributed to my kind of frustration, because I was like, let's do it. Let's make a big series, you know? And it doesn't happen really quickly. And then there's all these other storylines that get introduced to this book, of course. But no, I mean, I fully agree. Looking back on it, really, you're like, okay, really, this is tying up a bunch of loose ends, because from here on out, you know, you have Toll the Hound, which is a totally other thing, and then essentially the end of the series, you know, because 9 and 10 are, you know, whatever. So it is 100% setting us up to, you know, put a bow on it, because a lot of these things we won't come back to meaningfully.
I think it qualifies as the middle of the trilogy. Now, I say trilogy loosely, because I can count at least to 10. So what I mean by that is, like, the entire book is like one long Empire Strikes Back, but like the last hour of Empire Strikes Back, where everything bad starts to happen at the same time, and everyone meets up on Bespin. It's like that level of everything is just starting to slip into place, but things keep going terribly the entire time. So it's incredibly, like, the Lether stuff Like when you leave it off at Midnight Tides, Roulette is just, taken over, but we don't really know exactly what that means yet. And then we actually get to see it in detail here. And that's just like in the first 3 chapters. And so when people say that this book is boring, I can't imagine why that would be boring, to get into just how everything is going. And then once you hit the second half of the book, that's when you know that that's where the Bone Hunters are headed. And then we get the famous Unwitnessed speech. It's just, there's so many moments in this book that I go, fuck yes.
It's one of the best parts of the book. Yeah, 100%. In the mailbag, someone asked what our favorite part of the book was. I said it was that speech. I feel like it totally fooled, and knowing the whole series, it just fires on all cylinders, So it just is so important. So
I think my favorite beat my chest moment comes in this book, where Ublala Pung kneels down and says, "Lead me, war leader." I was like, okay, here we go. This is gonna be dangerous, but all right, we're in it now. Like if Ublala is that much on board, all right, these Teblor are gonna be a handful.
I do want to hear a little bit more about why you think it's. I know you've long said it's one of your favorite books, Kal, but I will say I don't know what I do think I probably would have called the book boring, or maybe still feel like there's parts, but I think it's not that there's nothing going on. I just think it's that at the start of the book, you are asked to yet again invest in a bunch of storylines that you have no context for why they're important at all. And I do feel like that is a difficult thing in some ways. I mean, if you count up the new things that are just like, oh, by the way, we're going to talk about the Shake, we're going to talk about the Yawl, we're going to go to Drene, we're going to talk about the Patriot. It's a lot of stuff that not only is new, but also I think, it is really loosely tied. So, I mean, I think I appreciate, I was able to make that leap easier this time, but I do think on the first time I was like, what are we doing here? I thought I was going to come hang out with Roulette again, and Roulette's barely in this book. He's essentially a non-character in the book,
So I think you hit on the theme of the book there, though, because the theme of the book is frustration and disillusion. Like each one of the characters goes through their absolute worst moment, and all of their sort of scales fall away from their eyes, and then they either get up and move on or they die. And that's everybody. Like the squads, Tehal, Karsa, Roulette, Troll, Saren Pedak, everybody gets broken down in this book. And it's each world falls apart. And then you have that metaphor sort of made real with the bin-tracked IMAS in the Refugium, because they do know it's a dream, but it's still these newcomers coming into it. It's the dissolution of the dream. And in the dissolution of the dream then becomes real. So
Jen, what were you gonna say?
So I was gonna add that what's interesting is that unlike some of the other books in this series, all those complaints I think could still be made on the second read through, because so many of those new storylines, they don't come back later. He's not introducing things that are ultimately going to be a major part of the end game. They're there to flesh out the themes of this particular book and nothing more. And so I do understand that frustration. I think at this point in the series, probably long before this point in the series, I had accepted I was in good hands and was just along for the ride. And I think that's kind of all you can do with these books.
No, and I agree. I think, Kal, when you're talking about some of this thematic stuff, and like how, I mean, these disparate threads are connected thematically, right? I mean, more than they are on a plot level a lot of the times. And I think reading it through the second time, I was able to more be like, okay, well, I kind of just got to take this for what it is and see how these things are going to go, and try and make these connections or make of it what I will. So I definitely wasn't really frustrated this time. I think it was just more that first time through when you're like trying to understand the tapestry, and then, you spend a lot of time with the Yawl or whatever, which I think is an interesting storyline, if a bit nonplussing at times, but
understatement of the year, but okay.
When I talked about that frustration sort of being baked in, being a part of this book, it's I don't know if this is the case for everybody, but for me it's a much more emotional impact than even some of the stakes later on. Like the stakes in this book feel higher than at any other point in this series, and emotionally. And I think for me, it's because when we look at this series and the sort of, or the, not the series, but this book and sort of the villains in this book, they are so recognizable. And the fights that people are engaged in and the futility of it are all things that I think each of us recognize from our own world. And more than any of the other books, this one feels very, very connected to real world events. That's always a part of Malazan. It's there throughout. But I think for this one, it's stronger than, for me anyways, than in any of the others. Because they're not fighting a big bad guy. They're not fighting an enemy that can be faced. They're fighting systems and institutions. And so even as we're rooting for the all, we see that there are good people on the other side. But we also know that even if they succeed, even if they are victorious over this particular army, that this giant machine they're fighting is just going to keep sending more and more and more until eventually they're defeated, that there is no real victory at the end of the day.
A personal theory of mine is that the reason that storyline's in the book is because the Lethir army has to be out of the city when the Bone Hunters get there. And so if you're going to have the army be away from the city, you may as well have it be interesting for the army to be away from the city. And okay, so, there's steps and stuff, people that are out there. And then you get a Lethiri and an Edor. And they're kind of the two sides of, it's like the Lethiri chain of dogs, because anyone who may have survived that comes out on the other side. In this case, it was a remnant of the All when it was a remnant of the Wiccans before. And they're going to tell the story of the great, empire that that either wiped them out or walked them all the way to where they wanted to go. But yeah, I think that's the only reason it was included, was because the big army had to be out of the city. So you might as well make it interesting.
I think I do think there's it's a logistical thing. Sometimes I do think there's like a weird attention to some logistical stuff. But I will say, I feel like the Red Mask thing is one of the bleakest storylines, and I think, Jen, as you're touching on, Steve sometimes says he doesn't like talking about politics too much, but I find it a very humorous notion. It's a very political book, but I find the whole idea very bleak, because in some ways it's like, is resistance to this thing futile? I don't know. It is a very dark message, And I know that's kind of a reduction of it, but that is obviously a question that is being asked, especially when you talk about the Chain Shamal turning on Red Mask and like what it means to wield the blade, like it's going to cut you too, in a sense, I don't know. It's a bummer book. So I really agree with you when you talk about how it's the stakes feel higher in this book. In some way, I feel like the stakes feel higher almost here than they do towards the end of the series in like a physical sense. I don't know,
in a
like
gut punch sort of way, because the end of the series, like there are a lot of great emotional moments, but it's also a more typical fantasy big ending, right? There are big, like the whole world is at stake. It's not actually something that most of us have ever experienced in our lives. Whereas this, all of the situations being faced in this book, these are things that we can very easily make parallels to, things and events in the real world.
Isn't this book the first book since, I think, it would have to be Gardens of the Moon, that nearly every single race is included in some way in the convergence? Because because a lot of them show up. You still have the Jaghut. You still have the Chain Shamal are somewhere else. But
I guess the Forkal Assail aren't there unless you count like the part Forkal Assail Soul and Kettle. But I feel like that's a real asterisk.
No. The Errant for one, and Kilmandaros.
Yeah, you're right.
And Setchelath, and
you're right.
Yeah, they're all there. It's
that is the kind of trivia and information I rely on you for, Kal.
Yeah, I'm very confused. Are you saying the Errants of Forkal Assail? I'm not in on this.
Yes.
This is shocking news to me. I always just thought it was just
Kilmandaros is his mother, right? And Kilmandaros is one of the Forkal Assail Azathanai. Like, she's the one that they worship. and then the descendants of the Forquillisail are the Barghast, and they're like the human equivalent, because they were always saying before, oh, they might be IMAS some ways back, but no, you find out later that they came from Forquillisail.
Interesting.
What are the other two? The Polyel and Soliel? They're also sisters. Yeah, they're also Forquil.
Okay. Well, listen, we don't need to get a whole down rabbit hole. It's an interesting thing I didn't know about this. But that's some ancient genealogy, I suppose. I guess I was always thrown off. Usually he's just drawn as just like a dude, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
unless you but he can make himself look like pretty much whatever he wants.
Yeah, he's
a god.
He's in human form, but
yeah. Well, anyway, but you know, back onto it, I suppose. Yeah, so I guess all the races are represented towards the climax of this book.
Yeah.
Although I guess I think the Change-Amal involvement, that's one of those things that they were asking me about. You know, I do get it does kind of come out of left field in a way if you're not in on it in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they could change them all, and also I think I carry him storyline like this book is very much just set up for later plot points.
100%. They just like are there and then.
Yeah, it's setting things up that are going to happen later in the series. And then even I carry him, I feel like his entire storyline is just setting things up that don't even happen in this series. So
no, they happened. We just didn't get to see the immediate aftermath.
Right. It's setting up storylines that are not going to take place in Book of the Fallen.
I know what you mean. It feels like 50 years in world, there could be a different series that like the Icarium stuff would be the ancient lore about, you know?
Do you have any plans to read The God Is Not Willing, Pete?
Yeah, I read that book. Yeah, we talked about it on the show. I talked to Andy Smith about it. Yeah, I liked it a good deal. Good book, I think. No, I think it's one of the better things he's written. So
it's a lot of fun. But that is where we start to see some of the aftermath of Icarium's actions in these books.
Yeah.
Where we start to see the new Warrens and the new magic and what's actually
I guess I just mean I don't feel like that's fully I don't know. I'm so focused on because I feel like that's anyway, but we can talk about that book more. Good book.
I want to stick with Reaper's Gale, but there are definitely aspects in this book that you're not going to get a payoff here.
No.
But if you're at book 7, you're probably used to that by now, I would expect, right? This is
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You made it this far.
I feel like I just really liked the Unwitnessed speech because I think going through it the first time, I didn't really have context for what was going on with Tavor, you know? And then additionally, I think clicking into that with contrasting with that to how I feel Karsa, which I feel like is a very purposeful contrast, you know, I just think it's very interesting thematic overlap, the speech rules, and not only does it rule on a plot level, it just seems very key. I mean, I don't know, it's part of the big thesis of the series, you know?
It is. And it's a lot more emotional when the second time through, I think. No. Because the first time through, you feel the same way the soldiers do when they hear it, which is basically, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, what do you mean on Wednesday?
Was it Child of Honor who was making the joke about the theme of Malazan as if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound?
No, but I mean, I get the joke, right? Like because this unwitnessed statement is kind of like a personal creed, right? I mean, it's kind of like just saying, it's kind of asserting that, right? That you need to like, I don't know, just accept you're going to do good and it be unwitnessed, you know? I don't know. It's kind of a moral duty or something, you know? I don't know.
It is a great moment.
There's no such thing as moral duties in non-political works of fiction.
Nice. Never. So Kal, we never really got to. We were looping back around to it from this first question. So when you talk about this, your favorite book, like why do you say this is one of your favorites?
The sheer amount of hell yes moments that happened in this book, and then there's one character who only appears in this book is very near and dear to my heart, and that's my boy Beak, who I will not cry while talking about Beak. Okay, I've said it. Now I won't do it. All right. But it impacted me in a very positive way when I first read it. And it's just, it's something that's stuck with me kind of ever since. And so I'm always going to love that book. I really love that book.
I realized right before you asked that question that you had asked me why it was one of my favorite. And I feel like I set up a lot of negatives, all of the really difficult parts of the books without getting to the fact that because that emotional gut punch, it just hits home in this one, it makes those moments of triumph hit that much harder. So that when we have those beak moments, for me, one of them is Fiddler on the Roof with the cusser. Still just ruin Ryan's. When you have those hell yes moments.
Fucking dragon.
Yes, it's incredible. And when you have that humor when Hellion comes, it's like this breath of fresh air, and it makes everything hit that much harder.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Midnight Tides, how that book really kind of, the way it uses tale and some other humor stuff, it's a real kind of tightrope thing in a way. Because, like, that's also a pretty dark book. But then, like, I don't know. The whole series uses humor to pretty well, I think. I do think it's a weirder thread, because I actually feel like the balance I feel is not on, like, it's not that it's not on point. I would say this is just a bummer book. It's mostly in the way that I think Dust of Dreams is a pretty bummer book. I think this book is also a pretty bummer book. And it's not like many of them are super upbeat beach reads or whatever. But I definitely walk away from Reaper's Gale, even with the triumphs, still feeling like, you're like, that's, I don't know.
Like, how in the world are they going to come back from this?
Well, you just walk away feeling like, man,
psych.
People can be pretty bad to each other, can't they? And I don't know. That's a really underlining the way some of these things are bad. I don't know. Not a life-affirming book.
Yeah, so like Hellion is a war criminal, right? She's basically a war criminal. She goes from.
Sorry, I missed that. Who?
Hellion. She's basically a war. She's committing war crimes.
She's winning.
She's so funny when she does it. I didn't even realize they were war crimes until later.
Well, that's one of those things. I think it's very interesting. I feel like I'm more tuned into kind of the weird questioning the Malazans have at this point, where they're like, so we're Malazans? ? We're invading Lether? We're, like, what are we doing? It's very interesting, about like, their relative status as here? Imperial soldiers,
She's just winning hearts and minds, Kal.
Winning hearts and minds. I was about a big fist pump moment when I first read the book, when she was like, we're going tavern to tavern. I distinctly remember being like, hell yeah, my girl.
And however you may feel about her methods, essentially she is one of the only people in this book that actually zeroes in on what the real source of oppression is, and then attacks it. She figures out who the debt holders are and goes after them, and then, reaps the benefit by letting them buy her drinks in the bar and sleeping in the inns. And it works. It's a win-win.
Except for all those people who lost their heads.
Well, sure, but you know what? They're at war. That was going to happen anyways. At least there's some sense of satisfaction
innocent civilians
in who she chooses to go after. Way. That's all I'm going to say.
Someone has to make Is Hellion an American video? And I think I'm going to do that. That's probably a good idea. Yeah, there we go.
I'm pretty skeptical that the next God of Willing book is going towards Lathyrus, but I would love to know more about the details of this, because obviously we spend such, we get a brief picture of it, I guess, in the rest of the series. But it is one of those things, I think, because this book's talking about the powers we hold and what has power over us and how these institutions work and all this stuff, The idea that it ends in, I would say, a fairly simplistic way of like, well, we're going to kill the rich people and then a good guy's in charge of the empire. It is like, to me, that is like an obvious, not an answer to the whole book we just set up of how these problems work, Yeah. So it seems like the start of another interesting conversation, but that's just like the book goes elsewhere and we're not meaning, it's just not a part of what that is.
Well, no, I personally find it fitting because there are no easy answers, and this book isn't going to come in and say, oh, this is just how you fix all of this. In the end, we do get this victory, and we do get a lot of those issues and a lot of those things that had been a source of frustration and anger throughout the books wrapped up. And it almost entirely comes down to luck, to a whole lot of things lining up just right and working out. The Bone Hunters got lucky. They did. But I think that's appropriate because this book can't solve our problems.
But don't you think the book is like wants us to feel good at the end when Tell's on the throne and joking around, and I was kind of sitting there like, this doesn't seem like a win to me. I don't know what happened, and I don't feel good about this. You know,
he's got Bug, the eldritch god of the seas, with him. How could he possibly screw it up? I couldn't say that with a straight face.
You didn't have that sense of satisfaction with the ending, even if we understand that really this was a whole lot of stuff lining up just right. And yeah, T. Hall ending up on the throne is a little crazy, although I think having Ruckett on his side and a lot of things already in place behind the scenes helped out, that there wasn't a sense of satisfaction for you in sort of being able to see actual change take effect by the end.
I guess it's the change that I feel more questioning about, and that's why I was talking about the kind of the future of it. Because to me, you know, if the book's so much about imperial systems or financial systems or systems of kind of enslavement in a way, of systems of debt, and to kind of have it be like, well, a guy we like's in charge now, and a cool god, and he says he's going to do different things. I mean, I don't find that a very satisfying answer to when talking about institutional or systematic problems. And I think there's many times where cool guys who have said they're going to change things is not really worked out. And I think it... And I think it's to the power, and it speaks to the power of systems and institutions, which this book is very much about, is kind of what has power over you. Are you going to change to the power? Is the power going to change you? And I just feel like I would love to know more of where the story goes, but I don't think we're actually going to get that in the Karsa stuff.
So it's almost like the storylines hit too close to home, and therefore you can't have that same like suspension of disbelief that you can in most fantasy books or even within these books, because it's like, yeah, but if I apply that to the real world, this solution isn't a practical one. It's not actually the solution.
Well, it's like
there's a sense of like cool. Oh, sorry, go Kal.
You know how people would like, you know, talk about if I ruled the world, I would do X, Y, Z, and other stuff. I'm sure everyone's done it. Like everyone's played the if I won the lottery game.
Sure.
And then extrapolated it further than that to what if I was actually literally the most important person on the planet? Like, what if that was actually me? Or maybe I'm just a narcissist and no one else has ever done this. But I think, you know, once you actually start pressing somebody on some of that stuff, the answers that they give, while they may sound good, may not actually work out at all. And it's like, you know, it boils down to who that person can trust. And then, okay, well, if I'm going to give them power, what are they going to do with it? So at the end of this book, we get the best possible version of Tehal's, okay, if I can become, you know, king of the leather, like, how am I going to do it? And then we don't really see how it goes after that, because like, okay, we have a terrible system. Let's replace it with the smartest and most capable. And so far, one of the most deeply moral people at the very absolute head of it. And then we don't get to find out what he does.
But Peter, I mean, I get where you're coming from, Peter, but I don't want an entire book about how T. Hall moves the iceberg.
What are you talking about? Bug would do it. And you would ask him why it's taking so long.
And I think it literally comes down to a kind of dramatic point. And I think this is more what Steve means about being political in a sense. Because obviously there's a type of dramatic catharsis when you have Tehol and it's like, yay, Tehol won. He kind of did the thing, you know, and you feel good. But, you know, in large, the series, I would say, is not very invested outside of kind of larger, I would say almost spiritual, metaphysical points in a way. Like, it isn't making a positive argument for a type of governance or societal structure. I mean, I think like, I don't know, there's some small lines, there's some small parts, like there's that part in Bone Hunters where they're looking at that tribe that shares stuff and they're like, maybe that's good. You know, there's flashes of this type of stuff, but largely it's more about looking at our current types of societies or, you know, inequalities or that type of stuff and reflecting on that and not kind of imagining an escapist alternative, a utopia, some sort of ideal society or something. So I do get it, because I do think, as you said, if Steve sat down and write 500 words about Tehol, who's a cool guy and made the best government ever, that's actually like super good, you know, yeah, I don't think it would probably be a great book. You know, I don't know. That doesn't sound like the recipe for great drama. So I you know, I do get what you're getting at, although the iceberg thing was a good joke. So, but I do think it's in line with the ethos of the book, you know, in regards to that.
Each race kind of has their own political ethos that
definitely
is taken to the most extreme in each case. So, like with Jaghut, you have the absolute isolationism, right? Of I don't know if that would be necessarily libertarianism, but we'll call it that for now. And then
libertarian Jaghuts is a funny pitch for the record.
Then the QuickJen Jamal are a form of collectivism.
Sure.
And it's the hive mind idea taken to its most extreme. And even still, their big problem was they fought each other a bunch, right? And then you have the IMAS, who I'd say are more closer to socialist than communist, if that makes any sense. And they also decided to commit genocide. And then you get humans who seem to just fluctuate just towards fascism and monarchism and haven't really moved on from it. And then they fight kind of across time.
No, 100%. But all I meant really is when it comes to looking at any of these structures, I mean, the Steve is often more diagnostic or talking about the ways we're cruel to each other, way these systems exasperate that, and not like, here's a great system I came up with, we should do this.
Right, you know? Right. It's not necessarily prescriptive. It's really about examining and taking apart and looking at the effects and the consequences. And I think giving us a different perspective or way of looking at our own world.
No. Is it kind of a metaphor for, I guess, humans in the face of climate change? Because
all right, that came out of nowhere. So how are we relating this book to climate change? I mean, obviously, hit me. I'm all ears.
Well, so the iceberg is the first symbolic thing that comes to mind. That it's been there forever. Now it's not going to be here. What is it going to do to everything else? Not only does it like destroy several towns and kill a whole bunch of people, but now part of the topography of the land is gone. And that was because a Jaghut did a spell, whatever, how many thousands of years ago. Now it's finally going away. And they have to deal with the consequences of that. Now, is it, I think it's directly Sin's fault because she's melting it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the IMAS, okay, so they probably, like, it's like if Neanderthals literalized the Ice Age into being caused by a race of people and then killed them all. And so that's in the face of climate change, how do these systems sort of interact with the world? And so far it just keeps being they kill each other a lot. Children are dying. It's the whole deal.
I do think there is something to be said about how I think in a classic sense, man like thinks they have power over nature. And, you know, it's like if you're talking about power, you know, man and nature is it's a whole fucking genre of books, you know. So
to build a fire is probably the most depressing.
Yeah, I think Dust of Dreams is where he delves more deeply into that. For me, this one, it's very much about oppression and the things humans do to one another and then how they react to that.
Whew, bummer talks.
I came in ready to defend this, and now I'm getting. We feel like we've ended up just.
Well, I don't. You know, I'm not really here to lay it on the book. You know, I'm glad. I feel like it's been a very predictable thing. All the books I read the first time and were like, I didn't like this one so much. When I reread it, I was like, yeah, it's better than I remembered. You know, it's by having the same reaction every time. So
it's usually better than you remember. And unless
it's usually a little worse than I remembered. I think it was great.
The second read through for me is where it's at. It's the most rewarding read through. Like it's better than the first, I think.
Way better than the first. Having a way better time than the first read through. You know. Yeah. My only wish is that I could read it on my own pace, because sometimes, because of the way the show's produced, I have to like read 2 chapters and then wait a few weeks, and then it's like, I don't know, it's a very weird pace to read a book, you know?
Yeah, I can't imagine. You're going to be what, in your 40s by the time you finish? Is that about right?
That's what I mean. It's like we read one book over 5 months or something. Yeah. It's not an ideal way to do it for me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to talk about 3 things I really, really, really liked.
Sure.
In this book.
Lay it on me. All ears.
First is anytime like the Malazan Marines have to step into the way of something that is so beyond their level they shouldn't be in the building. Where like the demon farmers.
Fun stuff.
Right? Like those are eldritch beings from a different universe who want nothing more than to kill. And now they've started a farm.
They're farming now.
They took out a forklift sale in the last book. I mean, yeah,
they chased it off, and we don't know if it actually killed it.
It's true.
They got out of pit, so it was more than most do in the face of a forklift sale. Basically, they're badasses. We know they are, right? And the bone hunters went and knocked on their front door.
I love Stormy and Gessler's reaction to the whole thing. They've blown the heck out of both of them with cussers and watched a couple of their Marines die, and then they hightail it out of there and just screaming, "Demon farmers, Fid! What is going on here? It's a demon farmer." It's just such. It's like one of those 1967 to 1980 something Vietnam movies where like they, step on a landmine and everybody gets swamped. And then like 3 seconds later, as the soldiers are running away, they're exclaiming, and it's actually funny instead of it being just terrifying, which it should have been. But, I love it when the book is able to do that. It's
but Steve loves having those little gags like that in there,
And of course, Beak. I've already mentioned Beak. But I think the third is actually the Andy Leosin Edur info we get in this book. Because we had the 3 sisters, Menendor, Sekol and Kadu, and the other one, Sheltathalor. There we go. I remembered them all. And their whole dynamic and how that's basically even Andy and small groups treat each other when they're draconic. And it's kind of like then in what do you call it? The next book, Toll the Hounds, we get that kind of explored even more, but from not the 3 girls, we get it from Animander and his relationship with basically his group that he keeps with him in Moonspawn, which is apparently the last view of the Andy. And it's just, I like that stuff.
I'm stoked to revisit Toll the Hounds, probably my favorite of the books. I will say, just so this can go on air, and I haven't told my co-host. I pretty much think they're not going to like the book. I don't know. That's my official guess.
Toll the Hounds. I mean,
I just think they're going to complain about it being very long and slow. That's my personal expectation, but I'm not saying it because I think if they know I think that, then they'll be like, "Oh, it's even longer and slower than I." So I'm like just dead silent about, but.
Toll the Hounds is a tough one. I think, you tend to land on one side or the other. Although I'm pretty sure I've landed on both sides, depending on, I think the first time through I didn't like it, and then I remembered not liking it, and so the second time through I was like, oh, it's pretty good. And the third time through I was like, no, this is long and slow and boring.
Well, see, I'm very curious about it because I didn't like the first time, and the second time I was like, oh, this book absolutely rules, best book in the series. So I wonder how I'll feel revisiting it the third time, But,
well, it's a study in causality, that book.
Yeah, it's so many things. I love that book.
It's a bunch of setups and payoffs stretched over nearly 1,300 pages.
Yeah,
it's very good.
Very long book. I do get. If people don't like the book, I get it. I'm not gonna, whatever. What were you saying, Jen?
Oh, I was gonna bring it back to Reaper's Gale, actually, because I think for me, yeah, the Bone Hunters are what make this book. And part of it is just having having T-Hall and Karsa and Hellion and all the Bone Hunters in a single book for me is heaven. I'm getting all my favorite characters all in one go. But we can talk a lot about Empire and the Malazan Empire in particular, but having this group that really has disconnected itself from that power and has come up in a very different version of Empire from the Letheri one, in which their individuals actually do have a sense of agency and value and the ability to influence the things around them. There's not that same sense of powerlessness that you see in the Letheri storylines.
Right.
And then we see it play out.
Malazan citizens have rights.
Yes, they have rights. And even within the army, we have, there's that willingness to allow even the lowest ranking soldier to give input in decision making, that they're allowed to speak up and say, yeah, this is really dumb and I think we should do something else. You're going to get us all killed. And we see that in the strategy that she used, because really she's just setting them loose and saying, do your thing, that you have the ability to go in there and make the decisions you need to in the field based on what you find when you get in there. And they do in lots of different ways. It pans out completely different for each group that comes in. The other piece that we see is that ultimately that is what saves them all, because Sort, first of all, is able to choose who goes with her and has that mindset of seeing that everyone within this army has value and something to contribute, and recognizes that in Beak when really no one else could. And I love Beak, but honestly, this book made me love Sort just as much. And I never thought I would forgive her after she stepped on Joyful Union in the Bone Hunters.
Nice.
But she did
I've been stung by a scorpion, and I sympathize entirely.
Yeah, I was no. I was with Bottle on that one, man. That was not cool. She was like the worst boss ever, right then.
I could understand why he was mad, but I would have stepped on that scorpion as well.
But that essentially Beak's power didn't grow in this book. He had all of that power in the Bone Hunters, and he did nothing in Igatan. And the reason he did nothing is because he had no sense of self-worth and didn't believe he could help, right? He didn't dare to speak up. It's Sort that gave him the opportunity and that gave him the confidence to make that decision, to believe in himself and to step up and say, yeah, I can do this. I can do this for my friends and I can save them. And they never would have succeeded without that. And that to me, I mean, it's not the book where I fell in love with the Bone Hunters, because I think that happened long before, but this one sealed the deal for me, because we really get to see all of those things that just make them great, that make them amazing. Plus, we have so many great moments. I said already, it's one of my favorite lines. I know this is, 3 million words of absolutely gorgeous prose, and the one line I choose from all of it as my favorite is fucking dragons. God, that moment. Karsa slapping Withal and saying, don't do it again.
Or what was it? One of the Eater mages or one of the Letheri mages who says someone gives answer when they unleashed the kill everybody spell where Beak does his moment. It's either the Eater squad or the Letheri captain up on the top of the hill before it gets, Uno reverse carded back at them. But he's asking what's going on, and he's just like, someone over there has given us an answer for what we've cooked up. And then it goes terribly for them, which I always like. The theme of giving answer is it's a series wide, but it really kind of hits its stride here, I think.
Sorry, just really been thinking, Jen. It was a great comment you had. I was really lost in it, so sorry I missed some of that. But well, what I was just thinking about really is you're contrasting the Malazan and the Letheri Empire, and then you're even talking about this individualism, which for the record I always found a bit curious, because to me, it goes to kind of, I would say, some of the strangeness of how Malazan, the actual Malazan, is drawn sometimes, because, I would say military institutions, armies, are institutions highly invested in conformity and stamping out individualism in a sense, typically, So it's a very strange thing in a way. And I do think it comes down to a very different way in which the Malazan and Lethari empires are drawn. In some ways, I would say the Lethari empire is almost comically like hyper imperialistic and whatever. It's like everything is cranked up to an 11, which is a very contrast to the Malazan thing, which I think is a much that more resembles something where humans live, where they're like colonizing 7 cities, but that feels more related to like how people live their lives. So I have a long thought about the contrast between the two. I would say the two main empires within this series. Of course, there are others and remnants of others, but these two take up most of, the modern time. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's an interesting comparison in a way, not only about the individuals and the soldiers, but the empires themselves. So,
yeah, well, another comparison that could be made is you look at the handling of the All versus the Wiccans in the development of the Malazan Empire. Where, granted, the Wiccan story did not have a happy ending, and that particular storyline was especially heartbreaking with the sort of rewriting history. But if we go back to the start, where essentially Cullen Ved goes in and recognizes that, again, these are people who have something to offer, that if we bring them in, they could make our empire greater. We could become something more than what we are. Whereas Lethari Empire, does not see it that way. There is no value in human life. There is only value in resources and money, essentially.
You could say the exact same thing about the Malazan Empire, though. We are in the Malazan Empire. We are in the soldiers' POV, so I think we grant them a lot more leeway. But when it comes down to it, they're both taking over everywhere. And sure, you can sign a treaty with them, but eventually your people will become our people, and they will no longer be your people. They will be a part of the Malazan Empire. And they may have a heritage and everything else.
I am not here to defend Empire. I want that on the record.
No, I don't think you are.
But I do think the contrasts are interesting in the ways in which the Malazan Empire veers from sort of the typical path of empire that we know from our own world. I think it's thought provoking, and I think it's interesting to compare that to the Lethari Empire, which is very much a reflection of empire as we think of it today, I think.
Yeah, in a weird way, I almost feel like the Lethari Empire is more making like a big statement about these types of structures in like big bold letters and stuff. And I almost feel like the Malazan Empire almost just serves more as like the Starfleet that is like functions as how we're telling the story. Do you know what I mean? And it gets interrogated more than Starfleet ever does. But you know what I mean? I feel like it's a lot of the times like it's the way into the story. It's like, all right, there's 4 Marines. They're here doing this thing, And then like, I don't know. So I often think it's like that's what is the plot entryway, and then everything else is being explored about it. But I know we're not talking about God is Not Willing, but that's a whole other conversation about the soldiers in those books. But
the answer is I don't know for the soldiers in that I need more of the story to figure it out.
Yeah, but to loop it into back to this book, which is why I think it's very interesting then, as I mentioned, I felt particularly attuned into this time to this question about Lassine's army, not only of them asking logistically, like, oh, what are we doing? What are our strategies? What are our tactics? But also this kind of, I would say almost spiritual identity crisis question of who are we? What are we doing? What do we represent? We came from an empire. We are these military. So, it's an important question to the series,
Yeah. And not because I think there were many like Malazan Empire true believers in the army. They weren't out there trying to bring freedom to all the continents around the world, but because even when they disagreed with it, even when they hated it, they knew why they were doing what they were doing. And
right, but it's an interesting conversation on a series level for the like just Malazan Empire and ethics, basically. But it's like, I'm sure AP has said this first.
He said everything first.
Say it anyway. But it's like that scene in Monty Python and The Life of Brian. What have the Romans ever done for us? Mm-hmm. The aqueduct. Sure. And then the roads. Well, the roads go without saying.
Yeah.
And it's a whole joke. And it's a funny joke. But it's like that premise is taken much more seriously. Well, if that makes any sense.
It's funny because I think that it is right to push back against systems that are oppressive. I also think that anytime you start to fall into black and white thinking and viewing a particular thing, especially one as complex as an entire political system or an empire, as evil, all evil or all good, that you're oversimplifying and not seeing the full picture, and that you can recognize the benefits while still acknowledging the drawbacks, right? That there are, and that doesn't, like I said, like I'm not here to support empire. That's not why I made that argument, but that doesn't mean that I'm capable of seeing where they've done things well, where they've done things right. And to pretend that I can't because empire is evil is just being willfully ignorant.
Yeah. Yeah. No argument for me. Maybe.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's one of those things. I always feel like it's like, yeah, but in the big conversation, it's like, it's just not a part of, I don't know. Listen, we're all not here. We're all on the same page, I feel, in some ways, but.
Yeah,
no, you want to argue? Let's have it.
Well, I don't know. I know what you're saying. It's like I obviously some part of me doesn't love making sweeping statements, but it's like when I like do I want to make a sweeping anti-imperialism statement? Yeah, I don't know. Part of me feels like maybe that is a time for something like that, but I do get what you're saying. Sometimes, you're loath to make a black and white statement.
I think that's a safe stance, and I would agree with you. But I also think that Malazan Empire is not a real empire; it's a fictional empire.
Yeah,
and that it is not. It's something different, something I don't think we've ever seen elsewhere, and it's interesting to see how Kal and Vid's approach resulted in a different outcome than the Lethari approach.
We're seeing that's where part of my hesitance has always come from. It feels like, did we just write a type of imaginary empire where we highlighted some good stuff and then we don't spend that much time highlighting? I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of Malazan bad stuff in the book. I don't want to act like it's not there. But I do think the positive aspects of Malazan society get highlighted more than any positive aspect of Lethari society. I mean, basically every time in Letharis, it makes it sound like it's a purely shitty place to live where everyone sucks.
We don't get a lot lot of positive to work with, though.
There's that lady who spends all of her time in the water. That sounds awesome.
Ersto Hubat's around. He's cool, but...
it's not a bad place to live if you're a god.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. I do think there's a lot of times that there's like kind of Malazan, like Malazan's pretty cool. Look, they have a great meritocracy. They're a great place. I don't know. I do think there's some Malazan propaganda in the books.
Oh man, you're just. Kamensad only writes pro Malazan propaganda.
Yeah,
Malazan,
big Malazan's paying off Kamensad.
It's
important. The entire world's being run by the Dalhanese.
It's important to remember the guy's coming in with a bias here. I mean, they saved him, so
he's coming out with a bias. That's right.
He's got an agenda, and you have to take that into account when you're reading the books.
That's right.
Anyway. His agenda is to emotionally manipulate you.
Legitimately, right?
Yeah, so that was being very literal.
Yeah. No. I mean, so anyway, obviously it's a real contrast between the two members. I just feel like with Lethary's always paints, it's like such a stark, thing. But whatever. Obviously, bigger conversation.
So is this the point where we ask you, what would you do if you were Tehal, and then interrogate you on all of your answers?
Well, see, that's what I mean. I think it's one of those easier things where sitting around and being like, well, I don't think Steve's going to be the guy. Well, in a way, I think that's what the books are about. But I don't think Steve's going to be the guy who's going to crack the human condition and figure out how to build a utopia where we all love each other, But I do think that's somewhat what the book's about in a way, So just not in like a political structure sense.
Yeah, it's more an individual message.
Yeah, I think he wrapped some things up because he needed to. And I think he also knew after a book like that, he needed to give us a somewhat satisfying ending. But that this book isn't really about that ending. This book is about asking those questions and raising those issues, and not necessarily about providing the answers at the end.
No, I agree. Yeah. Obviously raising more questions than anything else, right?
Yeah. It's a book about disillusion and frustration. So yeah, it's going to raise a bunch more questions like that. There's that slave character who works for
Udonis.
One of No.
I was making a joke.
I can't remember who he works for. He works for a factor. And
yeah, I know who you're talking about. I don't know his name.
He's the assassin. And then the market crashes, the Eater are falling, and this guy has just basically said, I've had enough. And he turns around and murders every single member of that guy's family.
Yeah.
Right? The implication is down to the children. Done. And it's like, okay, so you want to have a revolution. This is how that stuff happens. And it actually kind of does interrogate okay, if we were trying to make a utopia and we're going to be able to do it because now we have great Tehal the Only, the emperor with the god for a butler, and we're going to be just fine. How does it still get done?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's just one of those, it's like I said, the book ends where it ends. It doesn't go on. Yeah, Jen, what were we going to say?
I see that, but I also think that a lot of this, and Midnight Tides as well, is about what systems of oppression do, and particularly slavery, to the people who suffer within them, right? And how they react to that and the human responses. And that is one example. I see Featherwitch as another good example, she's not one of my favorite characters. I'm not a big fan of Featherwitch, but I think when you have oppressive systems, I mean, you're going to have those people within them, like thinking, let's go back to Eater and the slaves that just accept it because it is what it is and they can't change it. And so they're just going to do their best to get by within it. You've got those who want to escape and run away and just dream about their own personal freedom. And then you've got those that want to change the system. They want freedom for everybody. But you also have people like Featherwitch who really just dream of becoming the oppressor, to visit upon others what has been done to her. And that is a direct consequence of the system. And I see that slave the same way, that this is what they have created.
100% agree. I think it's an important parallel being drawn between Featherwitch and Adonis in this book, and I think it paints, it adds a streak of gray through this big picture about how, I think it can be very easy to note, like, to put some sort of nobility in that type of suffering, where you're like, man, the trauma, it's so noble. It's like these people are going to go through this experience and like learn some sort of thing and then like change the world, and it like life's just not this way. And trauma's terrible and it affects people all these different ways. And, I don't know, there can be a real simplification of trauma in a type of conversation around that. And she's obviously lived a hard life in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I absolutely love about these books and appreciate, and also makes me wonder if you are up for talking about Janeth at some point.
We can talk about it.
Okay.
Because I think,
go for it.
I think it's the most difficult part of this book to read, was for me. It's unpleasant. It's terrible. But it's also something that I appreciate. I do actually appreciate its inclusion and the purpose it serves. And I don't know, I would be interested in exploring that with you guys.
Sure. I'll come out. And then Kal, me and you have talked about this before, but I mean, generally I'm more of a critic of this type of stuff in the series. And to me, there, like, for example, I found that after kind of finishing Midnight Tides and reading this book, although I still have some frustrations writ large, I feel like I've come to really kind of connect with some of the Saren stuff a lot more, and I think Steve handles it really well in that sense, But I feel really frustrated by this Janeth plotline. I did not like it through the first time through, and this time around, I feel like ultimately, it's probably one of the worst ways he handles this stuff in the series. And I feel pretty frustrated, not only because I don't think it adds a lot to the book, I think Janet's in the book so little, and I feel very frustrated that her storyline fluctuates between her kind of being an object of sexual violence to Tanel to being kind of sexualized by Tehol, you know? And I feel like it really sucks that she spends very little time as a character, as a person, having an independent life outside of these two men. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I could go on, but I was pretty frustrated throughout this book about this plot line. But I will say, in my memory, it took up much longer in the book, but it's actually not as much as I remembered. I think it's just one of those things that, you know, those types of things stand out in your memories. But it was less than I remembered coming back to it. So, because basically Tenel's basically in the first part, all that stuff goes away for a long time, and then it kind of comes back towards the end of the book for a bit.
Yeah.
Which
was probably, I mean, I remember very clearly on my first read through that sense of frustration when, Jesus fucking Christ, again? Seriously, like, he got her out. She's been freed from this. It sucks, but we're back where we started again when she is recaptured. It was so incredibly frustrating. And I think it wasn't until, God, it might not have been until the second read through that I was able to actually understand. I don't want to say I know what he was doing, but where it clicked for me in a way that it connected in a way that I understood what the purpose was. And maybe I could be wrong, but for me, it was a message that I appreciated, I guess.
Do you want to speak on that? Or?
Yeah, well, okay. So you want me to actually say specific things and not just speak in vague. Sure, I guess I can do that.
Well, no, that's fine. I didn't know if you wanted to share it or not. If you don't want to share it, it's fine. So
no, well, all right. So first of all, I do remember picking up on this the first time through. I think a big piece of it is, yeah, you're right. It sucks for Janet. And maybe this is wrong, but this is one of those areas where I have to step back and not just see the character, but also see the book and the themes and the storyline and what is the purpose? Because when I come across something this unpleasant, this difficult to read, that's the first question I ask is, what is its purpose? Why is it here? Why would something like this be inserted into the book, right? And that first time around, what struck me is the absolute desexualization of the portrayal of torture. And
it's clinical.
It is, but that's not it, because he's always clinical when it comes to sexual violence. And I think that is important. But in this particular situation, this feels like a pushback against the portrayal of torture and the capture and torture of women as a very sexual thing in popular culture, in American popular culture, at least. I mean, you brought up Star Wars earlier, Kal. When is Princess Leia at her sexiest?
Are you talking about
when
the
she's
prison
flying
scene?
Through space in episode?
Yeah, you're talking about the Jabba the Hutt thing.
She has like
she's got the bikini,
her hands spread,
and the collar.
I was going to answer that question.
Yeah, and she's a slave, and that is not unique to those movies. It's pervasive. The sort of woman in chains with like artfully torn clothing that reveals just enough. It becomes this sexy thing in our culture. And to me, what this is doing is pushing back against this and saying it is not sexy. This is not.
This is what it looks. This is actually what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's a delusional psychopath who is taking advantage of a position of power in order to try to act out what he thinks his life should be.
Yeah.
And that is not a pleasant thing, generally speaking.
Yeah.
If you can put that almost in any society, and that is the worst combination you can really get.
Yeah. And so it resonated with me because I grew up with those images. And I didn't like reading about it, but I appreciated it being there.
It was like a deconstruction of the exploitation films in the 70s.
Yes.
Like I Spit on Your Grave and all of its sequels.
And the fact that you say we don't get to see her be her own person, but Janeth was a badass. She may have been chained up and unable to effect her own escape, but she was never powerless. She was a badass. And I
beat him up.
Yeah, I hated and loved reading her point of view because it was great to see this character that wasn't. Because again, I think of all those images I grew up with of these sort of helpless women that are just waiting around for men to save them. And she was never that.
Yeah, well, I agree. She obviously retains power in most of her scenes. And I think what you're playing on, very interesting point of view. Thank you for sharing it. I think, obviously in our patriarchal society in a way, I mean, like powerlessness is often associated with women or kind of portrayed as something, I don't know, like patriarchal straight relationships have a very defined definition of power, relationships within a relationship, right? Like a man aggresses onto a woman, and that's basically how the relationship works in regards to power. This is what is told, I don't know, you know what I mean? So I do think there is an intersection there with portraying a woman at a point of like ultimate powerlessness. Oh, she's like a prisoner and she's like scantily clad or whatever. It's like she has no power whatsoever. You are like her jailer or whatever, so I do think you're touching on something there.
And the other piece that I think I didn't appreciate until the second time around would be how her ending back up in there contributes to the narrator and also pushes back against that whole hero myth and the idea of the man coming in and like rescuing her and carrying her out, which is essentially what happens to her, although it's a god and not a man. But that more than that, it's underscoring the entire theme, which is that, what Bug did, it made a difference to Janeth, absolutely. And it makes for that great satisfying moment in which the guy goes in and saves the girl, and we get that sense of all is right in the world, except it wasn't, because the system still existed, and in effect, he had changed nothing. Mm. And that's where I see the fact that she ends up back there, and T. Hall does too, being this commentary on this idea that sort of like the man coming in and rescuing her, but that really ultimately this is not that it's not important to make a difference where you can, because it did matter, even if it's only to one person, but that as long as that system exists, this will continue to happen. And if not to Janeth, then to someone else.
Right. It's weird. Sometimes I get the sense that I think it comes from, this is why I personally think, it comes from a American neo-Puritanism that has been going around for a good bit, where anytime anything sexual in nature occurs in fiction, there's a discussion on whether or not it should be there, which is like a not in my backyard to the utmost degree. And so I'm curious, because you said this earlier, is that, it showed a sexual dynamic between Kal and Janeth post her first kidnapping, pre-second, where Kal is as forthright and honest as he can be in that situation and behaves like a good human. And then we get the, okay, well, why was this included? Question asked. So is it because it's of a sexual nature at all?
No, I don't feel that way. I just think it kind of, it's, in general, I think, the men in this series are not sexualized as much as the women. And I think it kind of sucks that her one storyline involves her getting sexually assaulted, and the other storyline is like, oh man, Tehol had this childhood crush on her. So I just kind of think it stinks that she, in both realms, she remains that object. And, so that's just, I kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
I'm not going to argue with you. I know exactly where you're coming from. And I agree. I do, except I am going to argue because I really do enjoy coming back with the playing devil's advocate. And but honestly,
I will just say, you made some great points earlier. I'm really loving this talk. So, I mean, it's very funny. We were going a long way and then we dived into the deep end of this thing. So please, really, you can go there. Go.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that does kind of suck, but you know what sucks worse is the fact that those statistics are worse in the real world. So, I mean,
yeah. I guess for me, we're really just blowing into it. So for a while, I've been talking about these frustrations about on the show. And I think for me, sometimes my frustration comes down to a lot of the times, as we kind of talked about when we try to talk about Bidethal, which I think people really, we did not do a good job. I did not do a good job communicating my frustrations, but to be through, feel like I've been working through my frustration with this, because I think you're right, Kal. There is just kind of a gut reaction that there is just like of course you're like, yikes, or whatever, I don't know. I did it. It's an audio medium, but
he did the whole yikes thing.
Yeah.
We knew what he meant.
But to get what you're getting at, Jen, sometimes I feel like there's a strange line where Steve's trying to have his cake and eat it too, I feel. And that comes down to ultimately...
Why can't he? That's always my question. Well, that's the point of making a cake, is you're supposed to have the cake and you're supposed to also eat the cake.
Nice.
So what is the cake that you're upset about someone eating metaphorically there?
I guess
what's
you
the
have
specific
to give the cake to someone else.
Yes.
Well, what I mean is this. So Steve, in my mind, offers a very shallow world building around gender, essentially hollow. And what I mean about that is in the same way that Star Wars and Star Trek does. You know, these shows are uninterested in creating an alternative world, a world without patriarchy. I mean, this idea is such a massive idea. It defines other speculative fiction, you know, but ultimately these books, Malazan, Star Wars, they're not interested in this. They want to tell a different type of story, but they want to have women play larger roles. So they kind of do a hand wave and we move on to other stuff, which is fine. But then I feel this weird clash when you want to talk about systems of oppression, or you want to talk about sexual violence, or you want to have that Bidethal storyline, or you want to talk about sexual torture. And some part of me just feels like there's a layer of meaning missing if we're going to talk about what does the sexual world look like? How is gender constructed in Letheris? How are men and women taught to relate to each other? You know, and it's to the point where we have a short point of view with Saren, and Saren Kennar says some, the guy, he says some misogynistic stuff too. So I'm like, okay, so is there a relationship with the with the patriotists in this? What is the connection to this stuff? And ultimately, I just walk away kind of feeling frustrated because I feel like Steve wants to write about power, violence, and some of these other themes. And I wish I knew more about this world. But ultimately, I come down feeling not only frustrated with some of the writing around women, but also just this kind of larger problem, this larger feeling I have about this is a frustration I've been having. So
I think you moved the goalpost twice, but I will forgive both of those.
I threw too much out. I threw too much out. That's what it is.
No, I'm like, okay, I've got like 4 different points I now have to make in response to that, right?
I've just been, okay. We just broke into it. We're doing it, baby. Here we are. We opened it up.
I just want to say, I like everyone here. I'm not trying to argue with you.
It's all good vibes.
I'm having a blast.
I'm trying to understand what you're saying, because sometimes when people try to communicate an idea to me and I try to simplify it to myself, sometimes I get it wrong. And I'm not too good at extrapolation in that way. So I really want to figure out what people mean.
Yeah,
so I'm going to, when you were like making a metaphor about the cake, I was like, did you just turn the idea of sexuality into an object to make it? And that gave me a headache for a moment. But because it seems that on the one hand, you don't want this thing explored. And on the other hand, then you say the thing that you, like you said, okay, basically, women involved in any sort of violent sexual interaction if you're not going to try and deconstruct the patriarchy while you're doing it. So do you want him to actually talk about those things, or do you not? Because that sounds like you were also trying to have your cake and eat it, or not eat it in this case. I guess you wouldn't be eating any cake.
I know what you mean. To me, it doesn't matter. You know, there's books that tackle sexual assault. There's books that are not. It could be either. It doesn't matter to me. And I think it's probably in some ways, you know, lots of people talk about, it's good to talk about sexual assault. It's under discussed. I agree. So we're in agreement about that. So I just find sometimes I feel frustrated that there's only so far we can go with those conversations, you know, and that's where I feel frustrated with the books, that it's both trying to, you know, not explore gender and sex and then kind of have many sexual violence plot lines. So that's something of frustration I feel.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there to unpack. And so I think for me, part of it is that they really are 2 separate things, because I don't believe that if you dismantle the patriarchy, you also eliminate sexual violence as a result.
I agree.
I don't believe those are 2 separate things. And I believe that you can have a society in which misogyny is not really a thing, where it's not a defining factor of a defining feature of that culture, and still have violence against women, that sexual violence can still exist within that world, and that there are multiple cultures. So, I mean, like, we're just looking at it in world. I think there are multiple cultures that have developed separately from each other. And so that the attitudes in Lether are not going to be the same as attitude in the Malazan Empire or in Darujistan or wherever, that there are going to be differences in the roles of women between those cultures and between the races. We see that as well.
And the roles of men.
Yeah, absolutely. So so that's part of it, but not really the important part, I don't think. I do get where you're coming from, and it's not even that I want to defend it. It's more that
you said something very interesting.
I think that whenever you're reading a book, it's important to, especially something that tackles topics as big as these, it's important to look at the why. Why does this exist? First of all, and secondly, to look at the time period in which it was written, right? That is also an influencing factor, like who wrote it, when it was written, all of these things. Like that this book was created. It was not created in a bubble. It was created within a context. And so we can be all woke here in 2022 and talk about all the things that he got wrong. But I can also tell you that when these books were coming out, as a woman who also enjoys fantasy, it was incredibly refreshing to have these women who just acted like people and didn't all need to, like, we didn't have to be stuck in this medieval mindset towards the genders. It was really incredible. And then to look at these issues affecting women in a way that no other fantasy series I can think of really did or has, that in and of itself was moving for me as a female reader.
Kal, you were saying something? I wanted to respond. I just wanted to hear Kal was trying to say something.
Sorry, Kal.
No, you're good. You're good, because that still makes this question a good question. Is because you said something interesting just a minute ago, where you said it didn't go far enough into interrogating these ideas.
Yeah, so that's basically how I feel.
That seems to be like the thesis statement of what we got going on here. Even going back to the Empire, is it Malazan propaganda or not?
Right. It was a bit of a joke, but still, yeah, sure.
No, it's believe me, I've been having this exact conversation, like to a T, about the Malazan Empire with one guy in my server for about 6 months now, where he has his point of view and he's going to say it and I'm going to read it. I'm going to try to find out what he means when he says this stuff. So they didn't go far enough in interrogating the Malazan Empire and what that means, or interrogating the military and what it does and what that means, is the same level of, okay, you included this, but I don't feel you interrogated the subject enough to justify including it.
I mean, that's basically how I feel. I mean, when you talk about genital mutilation, I mean, this is a really fucking serious subject, and I feel to broach that subject and not be pretty invested in interrogating it, I mean, it leaves me frustrated. And I think that's where I walk away with, and this isn't even talking about the women aspect or maybe how the women are written and anything. It just, obviously, I feel like, like I'm fine if the book wants to tackle that. I just wish we spent more time doing it. Or Jen, when you're talking about, of course, these cultures develop differently. I mean, I agree. Of course they do. But do we know? We don't know. A lot of this stuff is just, it's not what's on the book's mind. And that's just what it is,
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from, which is why I very much tried to frame my answer in that this was my personal experience reading the book, not because
and I really
to write it was the right way to do it, but that this is how it hit me when I was reading it, because and there wasn't anything else like it out there, and it was an unpleasant experience a lot of the time, but it was also gratifying to see it there on the page and actually have it recognized within a fantasy world in a way that it almost never is.
Yeah, I mean, I really respect what you're saying, because sometimes, and that's why sometimes I feel frustrated, but I always try and keep in mind, it's just like, I got to take these books for what they are. The books not being another thing is not something you can criticize them for, but it does. I do think these books obviously do more right by a lot of people than a lot of other books. So I'm not really here, sometimes I feel like, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's not like I think these are the worst. I don't know. I know I'm being hard on these books or whatever, but I don't think these books totally botch it and are all, but I think sometimes it's a mixed record. You wouldn't
be talking with us if it wasn't something you also liked.
Yeah, obviously I feel pretty passionate. Obviously I feel invested in the book somehow, but it's like, I do have always felt, I don't know, it tackles the subject a lot, and I've been thinking a lot about it on this read through. And obviously I don't get to talk about it a lot on the show, because when you talk about it, I feel like you can't help but talk about the whole series, or you're going to talk about the Howling, or I don't know. I feel like you bring it up to the next level, and you're not just talking about the one book. Right?
I remember
it's not. Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Kal.
No. I was agreeing. That was all. I was agreeing.
I do listen to the podcast. I quite enjoy it. And I am often reminded of my experience when I finally got my husband to read it, where I was so excited and I couldn't wait. And then I realized, like, oh my God, I can't actually talk to you about this. Yeah. Like, we need to come back and have these conversations again, like after you've read all 10 books, because it is so hard to just talk about the events in a single book.
And no one wants a 10-book homework assignment before you can have a conversation. No one wants that, except for insane people like me.
Yeah.
It's very funny. When I asked them to do the show, I was like, yeah, so it's like 10 books, but I really, I couldn't stress enough. I really didn't think they understood what they were getting into, but here we are, 7 books later. Someone asked recently, and it's funny you say that, Jen, I actually feel like I'm more frustrated now that we're closer to the end than I was earlier, because right now I'm like, we're so close. We're like 3 books away, and then we could just talk about everything. But then, like, it's better than when we were I don't know, on book 2, I was like, whatever. We're talking about this stuff, they don't know any, I don't know. But now I just am dying to talk about these big type of things,
Yeah. You're so close. Yeah. And then here's the thing is you're finally going to get there, and then you're done.
Exactly. Right? Fucking Christ.
Like the whole premise, the whole reason for you getting together and talking about the books is no longer there. Only now you can actually talk about them. And I don't think you can cover all 10 books in a single wrap up podcast.
No. What that looks like, I don't fucking know, but that's a decision for next year, I guess.
Yeah, no, I feel for you. I'm laughing, but I really, really do, because yeah, I understand the need to talk about these books, and then that frustration in having them be so close and really still not being able to just speak freely.
What kind of sucks, though, is because I sure you watched some of what you guys were talking about. But I almost wish we could loop the God is not willing stuff into this conversation about sexual violence. But I think we should stay on these one.
Right. Right. I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, but
if people are reading along with the podcast, I wouldn't want to spoil.
Yeah, but that book
too.
That's a really interesting follow-up to that, and that in a similar way, what I talked about with Andy Smith, I don't know, we can be a little vague. I just wish I knew more about, I wished I learned more about, I just end up wishing I knew more, but I thought he handled it pretty good in that book, I feel. So, but anyway, we shouldn't do it. All right, I'm done. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it.
It's part of, because these books really are, in the way they're written, he's not presenting everything to you fully formed. He's not spoon feeding. And so reading these books is an interaction between the reader and the books. And so I think the experience is, and the way we interpret what we read is going to be unique to every reader.
Yeah, which that's the fun, right?
Yeah.
It's like I sometimes get frustrated with people when we've both read the same thing and somehow I either didn't understand it or they didn't understand it because they took completely the opposite from what I was reading there on the page to be there or not there in some cases.
It is it is one of those things almost where when I come in, Kal, it's funny to say that when I talk about the show, since I think what you get out of the book is so much whatever you're going through or whatever's on your mind, like wherever you are, some part of whatever's on your mind is being reflected back at you. So whenever I share something on the show, I'm like, this is what the storyline's about. I'm always just aware that, like, obviously some part of me is just being processed through the book or something, but I kind of think that's what reading's about, right? So
the consumption of information changes the information consumptioner.
Yeah, I mean, you're hearing a different point of view, but also you're kind of hearing what you want to hear or seeing what it gets into that weird space,
Well, but just like in conversation, the end goal of conversation generally, I think across conversations, is for people to agree with each other. That's the entire point. And so when in conversation, you're trying to get the other people in that conversation to agree with you, or you're looking to be agreeable to them. So when you take that and kind of extrapolate it out, when writing a book, you want the person who's reading the book to be on the side of the book. And whether or not you can tell if the book succeeded in some areas or not is how many people thought the book justified its existence and agreeing with the book in some sort of context. So when you have something this big, when you get to the end, I don't think anyone's going to say, I agreed with all of that. And I think that's the point of conversation as well, is to try and reach that point where you do agree. And it's one man's very courageous attempt at trying to figure some stuff out for himself. And there's really good shit in there. But that doesn't mean you make a religion out of it. Don't do that.
No, I agree. I mean, I think, Malazan fans can obviously speak pretty passionately. And I think sometimes, I feel like a weird...
I just nodded on an audio meeting.
I feel a weird sense because I think and I don't know how you got... I feel like it's like, it's like 10 really good books. And then there's like some parts that I think are okay. And then there's parts that are really, really great, But I do think it's best not to turn it into some sort of, Steve Erickson Bible,
Right.
Yeah. When we talk about that, what's interesting to me is, I was thinking about the fact that one of the great things about it is that it means there's so much room for discussion and for everyone to bring something different to the table when we talk about these books. Because Malazan-tubes is a whole thing. There are all of these servers and podcasts dedicated to these books. And yet it never feels like a whole bunch of people just going over the same ground again and again and again, because there are so many different ways to interpret and to understand these stories.
I would say I agree with you there, except for new people reading Dead House Gates and Felicen. There's nothing new to be said about that subject under the sun.
100%.
Time is a flat circle.
100%. And honestly, that's why I've spent less time on the Malazan subreddit, because literally half of the posts are like, I'm thinking about getting into Gardens of the Moon. Or it's like Felicen post. It's like, what are we? Or Coltane was sad. But of course, you're going to have these like common points again and again. But I do think it's always, I don't know. And I don't think it's worse, bad. A lot of people have very common readings. If you ask anyone, like, what are the 10 books about? What's the thesis? I think you're going to get 10 versions.
Ass in it.
You're going to get 10 versions of the same answer, which is probably a good point. But I do think what you're getting at, Jen, which is true. I mean, I think so many people, and this is why I was excited to talk to you guys, since I know you guys are more into Reaper's Gale, and it's like a book. I don't know. I feel fine about it, and it's always exciting when to talk to people who are like, I really love this book, or I really love this part of it, because you're seeing, I don't know, everyone has a different part that shines through of what they like, or a storyline that speaks to them, or that you see something in it. And that's why I was really glad you shared that thing earlier, Jen, about what spoke to you about the Jan plotline. It's like, I don't know, it's like always really interesting and enriching to find out that stuff about that. By the way, Kal, I want to ask what you spoke to you about the Beak plotline earlier, but it also sounded a little private. I didn't know if you wanted to share it. You don't have to. I was just saying.
I did in a comment once, but the person who was reading the comment was kind enough not to put my name when they read it. No, it's
you cannot share it.
The first time,
this can get edited out.
I don't think I've actually talked about it out loud. I've only ever typed it, I think. So bear with me. But
if Kal,
the first time I was
just once again, if you don't want to, okay,
it's okay. It's good to talk about stuff, even if it is difficult. So when I was reading this series for the first time, I was not in a good spot just in life in general. Things were extremely stressful, and I wanted that to be over. And then I also stopped sleeping for a period of time at the same time. So I was just not having a good time. So I got to the point in that book where it's the climax of the Beak storyline. We've heard some stuff about his at-home life, but we've never actually seen like a flashback really. And it's when he goes into the barn and tries to rescue his brother, right? And Beak is an innocent. And I think his thoughts are real in the sense that they do make the most sense for an innocent to find this. And so it's the impact of what his brother felt that he needed to do that really just, it was a good thing for me to read. And I'm glad that I read it. It's also a really difficult chapter to read in general. Chapter 22 and 23 of Reaper's Gale are rough on the emotions, right? But I do think it was important for me to read that when I did. So I will always love Beak.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Kal. Glad we're talking. And I know what you mean. And in a way, I finished the series in a pretty dark place, I'll say. And and it's actually one of the reasons, I think, because I would not say I was really fully with it in many ways during most of book 9 and 10. I could tell you what happens in the books, but I felt, let's say, I don't know, reading those books was not my highest. I was not going on an emotional roller coaster driven by Steven Erikson at the time. I don't know. So
no, I went it off of Mr. Bones' wild ride.
Yes. And so some part of me is very looking forward to approaching, I don't know, to kind of returning to some of those books in a better place mentally. And just, I don't know. So it's,
yeah. Circumstances matter.
They do matter.
That is 100% true.
It touches on something. I can't remember if this is something you and I talked about or not, Kal, but this idea of both the importance of trigger warnings and also the recognition of the opposite effect that art can have, where it can absolutely reignite traumatic feelings and experiences, and yet it can also be cathartic for the same reason. And whether or not, which effect it has is completely unique to the person reading it and the experience and where they're at when they come to the books.
Yeah, I mean, I think that conversation is one that was kind of just ruined online by really toxic bad actors in a lot of ways, I feel like
most of them, actually. It's not just this topic of conversations, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. The internet can just be a terrible place to have discourse, but I just associate trigger war, all this stuff, it just...
Did it trigger you? Is that...
It's just like the internet... Am I
connected with QuickJen or Ben Shapiro? What's going on here?
Fucking crazy dudes. No, I mean, I agree, Jen. I mean, Jen,
I think it does have value. I think that
no, I know that's not what you're saying.
It's a real thing, and that it's something that it is helpful to be aware of when you're going into this book.
Yeah, I know that's not what you're saying. I was just, I don't know. Some part of me is always loath to talk about it just because it's online. Just some fucking... I know. People need to calm down a lot. It's we're talking about a really minor thing, But anyway, that's a whole cultural... But no, I agree. I mean, I think that's why... I think I got into this book. And I think when you talk about an appetite to, I would say, tackle some of these heavier subjects. Obviously, we just kind of got off talking about that sexual assault stuff. And now here we're talking about some of the beaker and heavy stuff. It's I think I only got into that at the time because I kind of discovered that, let's say, there was a whole world of serious art and art doing stuff and artists doing whatever, you learn about more, adult fiction or something, I don't know. And, it's pretty crazy, and it's a lot of it's pretty revelatory. And like Kal, you're saying, it's a lot of it changes your life. And you're like, man, this totally changes how the way I think about stuff, But also I will say, I think, and that's where some skepticism has grown in me over time, where some part of me looks back or I turn into a movie and I hear there's a 9-minute rape scene in it. And I'm like, I don't know, man. It's maybe it's going to be fine, but I don't know. It's I do think some skepticism has grown in me as we've come to things that are tackling the darker part of life. But, I don't know.
Anything quantified and stated in a dry tone can sound terrible.
100%. And that's the thing. I always try and give the artist the benefit of the doubt. I think that's something you got to give the work, but, it is something that, art has to go there. But I do think some part of me has a more skeptical eye than when I was 17 and just consuming everything. And I was like, this is, whatever.
There are.
So let me ask you a really pretentious question. what do you think about the idea of the theater of cruelty?
I don't really know. Familiar with the idea, so
okay,
that's your answer.
It was a play movement in the 1920s, 1930s.
Okay,
where the guy wanted to shock the audience so hard that he would introduce like actual pain, not like physical pain, but emotional pain, if he could get them invested enough into it. And that the point of art was to make somebody realize something terrible, but maybe good, as long as it makes them feel something. And so some of his plays make absolutely no sense. Talking about flies falling out of the ceiling and blood spraying from the floor. And people would try to act these out in the 1920s, 1930s with like props and stuff. So its prescriptives are absolutely bizarre. But they think the point of the art itself is to get someone to feel an extreme of emotion. So if you don't think that idea is any good, generally, not you specifically, in a general sense, if one accepts this idea as the correct idea with art, then no subject is off limits. Because in the theater of cruelty, the only commerce is pain. And so you want that person to have a connection to something and have it taken away from them or changed to make it not what they thought it was.
Did a little Googling here. Looks like one Terry Pratchett also wrote a short Discworld story called Theater of Cruelty. Just a fun fact.
I haven't seen that. Will you send that to me? That's very cool.
Anyway,
I want to read it.
Yeah, I mean, interesting stuff. Reading a little bit about the avant-garde theater. Obviously, a total other world there. But in that regard, I mean, we can talk a little bit more. We're really kind of abstract now. But Jen, I'd love to know what you think. I would just say, for my 2 cents, I don't know. I think that that only goes so far. I mean, when I'm not saying this about Malazan, but I just think in general, when people talk about shock value, I mean, that's kind of like at a certain point, putting something very shocking on screen that's like or putting something terrible on page, like I don't think that justifies itself as like, man, I read a sentence about something terrible. It made me feel bad. This has some sort of value. I'm pretty skeptical of that argument. So.
I have to say that, first of all, that cynical approach, because I do think a lot of it sometimes just is about the shock value. I get that and I agree with that. And that even when there is actually some true message or artistic intent behind it, that there are tons and tons of examples of it being done poorly and very few of it being handled well and in a way that adds something new to the conversation or a different perspective. For me, I'm not going to say the books are perfect, but these books, for me, hit in a way that resonated with me and so had value. And I know that it won't for everyone, but that I think they were done well. It was handled well.
No, Jed, I mean, I agree. Obviously, they resonate with me. They have value. And I think, Kal talks about I think they've changed the way I live my life in a lot of ways. But when you talk about these motivators, I think that's what, to bring this back to what I kind of mentioned before, when I was consuming all this like serious art with all these serious adult themes and stuff, at a certain point you realize, man, a lot of these stories have violence against women in them. And that's like part of what makes them dark or serious. And I think that's, Jen, when you're talking about looking for stories that have value, bring a new perspective to the conversation, contribute in some way. I think that just has become a part of how, I think about these stories now that, you go, I don't know, I'm not 14 or 16 or whatever, So, but that's just going to be how growing up is now,
Yeah, because the flip side is, for me, and again, this is the perspective I have growing up when I did, is not an absence of those things, but rather the opposite. These very like sexualized images of violence against women, that's something like titillating and exciting about them. And having that context changed the way that I read these scenes.
And to touch on that, because you mentioned the word clinical before, and obviously it's kind of withdrawn about it, and like if you were going to say like, man, he really glams up the sexual violence, I think that's a pretty unfound criticism, and I make a lot of criticisms of his sexual violence stuff, but and I think, and that's why sometimes I feel like I'm like, oh man, I'm really harping on about this stuff, but if there were like, it's not like he gets it's like he does a bunch of stuff pretty good, I think. I mean, like, it could be way, way worse. Lots of people do it way, 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 way worse. But, you know, I don't know. I think it's still important to have that conversation and these types of conversations because it could be worse. I don't think is always like a great, you know, I don't think that's a great metric for things a lot of the times, you know?
I agree. And I hope that wasn't the crux of my argument.
No, I know that's what you were saying.
No, it's usually me. If you get all the way down to it, as well, it could be worse.
Could be worse. You know, which for the record is not always the worst attitude in like a personal like type of gratitude sense.
Listen,
you know?
I don't know that it could be worse than it is in these books, but it definitely could be handled worse. That's for sure.
It could be handled worse, and it is handled worse by many lesser ways. So. Oh man, we really blew. I thought we really went a little long on this one now, didn't we?
I realized the second we started really digging into the Janet stuff, I'm like, this is not your hour-long fun talk, Peter. This is not.
No, it's good. I think AJ will be like, why is the episode so long? And it's like 50 minutes in, we swerved into the heavy stuff, you know. But no, it's great being able to talk about it. One other thing I did want to mention is that one part of this book, I felt like I super connect, like the Fear, Saren part, you know, that whole party, that crew. Really,
the jolliest quest.
Loved that section a ton. Loved it a ton. And I was really frustrated and didn't like it at all. It was my least favorite part of the book last time I read this book. So it was awesome to revel in it the whole time. And I think it's because I loved Udana so much in book 5. I was pretty disappointed. He pretty much does nothing in this book and was kind of just frustrated that all these characters were going off to do something I didn't care about, and they just sat around having conversations, and that were sad, you know, in a sad boy style, like conversations like they do sometimes. But I was way more tuned into it, loved it this time around. So I would say one of the highlights of the books, you know. So
oh man, the amount of verbal shots Udanas throws.
Oh my God,
during
he's
that quest,
brutal, just stabbing,
just ridiculous.
You know, nonstop, but.
Yeah, he's the one who makes the joke about an eater stabbing an Andy in the back, like to Silchas Ruin's face, which is awesome, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I guess when you are the dad of a dragon, maybe your I don't give a fuck energy goes way up. So I don't know.
Was there something like specific you want to talk about with that storyline, or?
No, it's just wanted to throw it out. I was thinking about other things to talk about, and I just remembered I wanted to shout it out for. Because after this, I guess we'll talk to Steve, and then I'll probably be done talking about Reaper's Gale for a bit. But, you know,
it's a good book.
Good book. No,
we didn't even mention Apocalypse Now in connection with their journey.
Yeah,
but
their journey has a lot of stuff going on.
For me, it still isn't the most, like, it didn't resonate. It's still probably my least favorite storyline in the books. Yeah, but I'm
in all 10.
Well, no. Sorry, in this book.
Okay, that makes sense. I was like, whoa, all 10. That's a big pick.
No, it's not. They're definitely, I'm sure there are others, but in this book, it's probably the one I was least emotionally invested in. No. And that maintains, I think, I still find myself sort of impatiently waiting for the Bone Hunters to come on screen because that's where that's the stuff I really love.
Oh, whoa, big talk. Feel well worn. But the good news, it was great talk.
You're lucky for you. It's like only like 2:00 in the afternoon for you now.
Yeah, is it too late? Is it too late for you? Is it like 11 for you right now?
It's 11:05. I'm doing fine.
Wow,
I'm usually up until about 3:00 in the morning. So.
That's crazy. I go to bed at like 9. Yeah. All right. Well, anything else? Anything else on our Reaper's Gale radar?
Nothing book related. Jen, do you have anything you're working on?
No.
You want to tell people about? No.
No, nothing.
What about you, Kal?
I'm working on the dumbest project I've ever decided to do, which is a summary of every book with pictures and animations and stuff. And the script is really, really, really long right now. I'm going to record all of it and then see what editing needs to be done. I expect it to be in excess of like 6-7 hours when it's done, but it will be the definitive Malazan YouTube video. If anyone wants that in their life, it will be available.
I feel like now I should probably call out the Malazan cryptic crosswords on unabridgedburners.com because myself and Biggest Bad from Isker Direct's Discord server have been creating crossword puzzles for each book of the Big Ten. We still got 2 more to go, but we're going to get there. And if you like cryptic crosswords, it's kind of fun.
That is a great plug. Did not know these even existed. Hell yeah. So,
yeah, they're fun.
We'll have to get that link from you and put it in the description for the show. And thanks so much for coming on. It was a great chat and went a little long, but had a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me, Pete. I enjoyed myself.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone. That'll do it for us here today. Next week on the show is me and Iskar Jayerg's conversation about a sale, and then the week after that, we talk to Ian Cameron Elsamont ourselves. So look forward to that, and then we'll be back talking to Steve towards the end of the off-season before we do Toll the Hound. So thanks for listening, everybody. See you.